In today's story, I want to share an experience that began as a perfectly ordinary Saturday morning but quickly spiraled into one of the most frustrating, surreal, and tense situations I've ever encountered, a story that still makes me shake my head when I think about it. Because what started as a minor car issue became a full-blown misunderstanding involving accusations, police intervention, and a neighbor whose assumptions turned a calm day into chaos. It all began when I walked out to my car in the quiet parking lot of my apartment complex, ready to run a few errands, only to discover that my battery was dead. And though this was not a huge problem, something I had fixed dozens of times in the past, it immediately demanded my attention as I realized that without a working battery, my plans for the morning would come to a standstill unless I acted quickly. I froze for a brief second, dumbfounded, my brain struggling to reconcile what I was actually doing, jump-starting my own vehicle with what she was imagining, which in her mind had already escalated from a harmless act to a criminal offense. And as I stood there, the jumper cable still in hand, I realized that the absurdity of the situation was only beginning, because she was not simply observing, she was actively calling the authorities, speaking in a tone designed to be heard by anyone within earshot, narrating her version of events in a way that painted me as a dangerous intruder rather than a neighbor trying to solve a mundane car problem. I raised my hand slightly, a universal signal of innocence, and tried to explain, calling out to her that I was merely jump-starting my own car, but she waved me off, her focus entirely on the phone call and on framing the situation in a way that made her the concerned and vigilant citizen, completely ignoring the fact that I was providing a reasonable explanation in real time. And within minutes, the sound of approaching sirens cut through the quiet morning as the police vehicles pulled into the lot, lights flashing faintly under the soft sunlight, their presence instantly magnifying the tension, as the woman's story had clearly been persuasive enough to warrant immediate attention. The officers stepped out cautiously, but with professional composure, scanning the scene and assessing the situation as I remained standing next to my car, the cables dangling slightly in my hands, trying to exude calm while internally my heart raced. Because even when you know you are innocent, having someone falsely accuse you in front of the police is unnerving in a way that goes beyond frustration. It is a sudden, almost surreal exposure to judgment and potential consequences for something that never happened. And as one officer approached me to ask for my explanation, I carefully detailed the situation, emphasizing that the car with the dead battery was mine, that I was simply using jumper cables from my other vehicle, and that there was no criminal intent, while the other officer began to engage the woman, who was standing with arms crossed, pointing at me intermittently as if presenting evidence of a crime she insisted had occurred. Despite my calm and clear explanation, the woman continued her barrage of accusations, claiming that she had seen me tampering with the car, and insisting that no innocent person would behave the way I had, her voice sharp and insistent, filled with the kind of self-assured indignation that comes from a belief that one is always right. And as the officers listened, they carefully requested proof of ownership, so I produced my keys, my driver's license, and the registration for the car, along with a brief offer to unlock the doors so they could see that nothing had been forced. Everything in perfect order, which seemed excessive in my mind, but was clearly necessary to dispel her false claims and provide evidence that she had jumped to conclusions. The woman, however, remained unconvinced, muttering under her breath and gesturing at me as if the police were missing some invisible detail that justified her original complaint, her frustration mounting as the officers methodically verified the evidence I presented, from the license plate to the paperwork inside the glove compartment, demonstrating in clear, factual terms that I was indeed the rightful owner of the vehicle. And yet she continued to insist that she had been threatened, that my actions had been suspicious, and that I should have immediately understood her discomfort and responded to her implied accusations before the police arrived, creating an almost absurd scene in which reality and perception collided in a way that was both frustrating and surreal. While this was happening, I finally connected the last jumper cable, tested the vehicle, and heard the reassuring roar of the engine coming back to life, a sound that seemed to punctuate the absurdity of the situation, affirming that my actions were completely legitimate. And yet the tension lingered as the woman continued her complaints, now softened slightly only by the realization that the police were not taking her side, that her assumptions were being systematically dismantled by facts, and that her narrative was collapsing under the weight of objective verification, which in turn seemed to infuriate her further. because she had invested so much in her own version of events that seeing it unravel was almost unbearable. The officers, maintaining professional patience, explained to her that no crime had occurred, that jump-starting your own car is legal and common, and that there was nothing further for them to do. But she still muttered complaints about suspicious behavior, highlighting the tendency of some people to cling to their subjective feelings over objective reality, and after what felt like an eternity, she finally left, stomping back to her car with her face red from a combination of frustration and embarrassment, slamming the door in a dramatic flourish as if the world had wronged her, despite the truth being fully established, leaving me standing in the lot, heart still racing, feeling a mixture of relief, disbelief, and a lingering irritation at how quickly a calm, mundane task had escalated into a scene worthy of a crime drama. As I sat in my now functioning car, reflecting on what had happened, the morning sunlight filtering through the windshield and illuminating the slight smudges on the dashboard, I realized that this story was not just about a dead battery or a neighbor's paranoia. It was about how ordinary actions can be misinterpreted, how assumptions and ego can escalate minor situations into unnecessary conflicts, and how maintaining patience, providing evidence, and keeping a clear head are essential tools when facing someone determined to twist reality to fit their fears, because in the end, only calm reasoning and proof can dispel the fog of misunderstanding, even when emotions are high and accusations fly. Driving away from the parking lot, I couldn't help replaying every detail of the encounter. The woman's pointed fingers, the glare of judgment in her eyes, the way she described my actions to the dispatcher as a criminal act, the precise moments when the officers examined the vehicle and paperwork, and the surreal relief of hearing my engine roar back to life. And as the street stretched ahead, quiet and ordinary once more, I realized that while the ordeal was over, it had left a lingering lesson about human assumptions, the fragility of perceived reality, and the strange satisfaction of knowing that the truth, no matter how absurdly challenged, ultimately prevails. Even as I continued my errands, I kept thinking about the absurdity of being accused of something as trivial as jump-starting my own car, about the adrenaline that had surged through me during those tense minutes, and about how easily ordinary life can be disrupted when someone decides that fear and suspicion justify immediate escalation, all while reflecting on the patience and composure required to navigate these situations successfully, the quiet power of facts over assumptions, and the reminder that sometimes, even when the world seems unreasonable, your own actions, integrity, and clarity can restore balance in ways that leave others speechless. By the time I parked at my final destination and stepped out of the car, feeling the warmth of the sun on my shoulders and the faint breeze, carrying the sounds of a calm neighborhood, I realized that this experience had become more than just a personal anecdote. It had transformed into a story about human behavior, the consequences of jumping to conclusions, the absurdity of false accusations, and the quiet, satisfying justice of truth prevailing over paranoia. A story I still recount today with a mix of disbelief, humor, and relief, because even the most ordinary mornings can unexpectedly turn into lessons that leave an impression far beyond the scope of what one might expect when a simple car battery dies. And as I locked my car and walked away, thinking about the woman driving off in frustration, about the officer's patience, and about my own composure, I realized that while the day had begun with nothing but a minor inconvenience, it had turned into a vivid lesson on how assumptions, fear, and ego can create unnecessary drama, how ordinary people can become actors in scenes they never intended, and how calm reasoning, evidence, and patience are sometimes the only shields that protect you from the absurdity of others' misjudgments, leaving you with a story that is simultaneously frustrating, amusing, and profoundly human.